Okay, so we'll be moving on to the next presenter. The next topic, rather, we have vaccinating your company against the unknowns, building agility in a disruptive world. This topic will be dealt with by Ayodeji Ajibola, who is currently the head of HR at Guiness, Nigeria. I'll introduce her by reading out a brief bio, and then she can take over. Okay, so Deji, who was initially trained as a lawyer, but decided to pursue a career in human resources, getting a master's degree in international employment relations, human resources management from the London School of Economics and Political Science in 2003. Deji has worked in, he started off a career in HR in Philips Consulting, and then later on moved on to Oando, where she was in Oando, and then later on moved to the to GE, and then from there she was also at Microsoft before she now ended up currently at Guinness, Nigeria. So I'll just hand over to Deji. She can do justice to the topic. Good morning, Deji.
Good morning, Omotayo. Nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm very well, and you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me amongst a panel and array of such esteemed leaders in HR. It's my pleasure indeed. And, you know, especially when you're talking about issues that are so pertinent to, you know, our current reality. So I think you've done enough in terms of intro, so I'll just get right to it. If you can permit me to share my screen. Okay, I can share already. 1 second. Sorry, just give me a moment. Okay. Okay, 1 second. I would need to share and reshare. Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, let me know when you can see it. I'm sharing already. Okay, let me reshare. Just give me 1 moment.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, this should do it. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Awesome. You know, with technology, you never know. It has a life of its own. Sometimes. Yeah, so hold on 1 second. Let me hide. There we go. Okay, can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay. 1 second. Okay, so thanks. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you, Omotayo, to HR Tech Nigeria and Africa for creating this platform, you know, to discuss a lot of the pertinent issues that we're facing currently, like I had said previously. Let me just start by saying that, or stating that over the past couple of years, you know, a set of critical global forces, including the pandemic. I really don't want to center this around just the pandemic, because as we've all seen, you know, yesterday was the pandemic, today it's the war in Ukraine, which, you know, funny enough, has come to affect us directly and indirectly. So I'll just really center this, like you said, around, hello? Hello?
Yeah, go on, please. We can hear.
Okay. Yeah, network is on and off. Sorry about that. Okay, so I really don't want to center this around the pandemic because, you know, it's obvious that in the world that we live in, there will most likely be one global event or the other that affects us all, right? So to say that a set of global forces have been reshaping how, where, and why people work, right? And as a result, we have a new world of work to which organizations must adapt. And there's no going back on that adaptation, whether we like it or not. The pandemic has forced businesses worldwide to operate differently overnight, even within sectors that never thought that a new way or a different way of working was possible. And employees who had never worked from home or differently before suddenly had to change lifelong work behaviors that they had learned from their parents. And equally suddenly as well, employers have needed new ways to maintain visibility and oversight of their workforce. But in each case, technology, of course, has played a very critical role. So post the pandemic, organizations across all sectors have redoubled their use of technology, as we've seen, to boost speed and efficiency. This conference being a very good example, and this in turn has changed the skills and priorities within businesses, and having experienced how fast they can move when compelled to and they don't have a choice. Leaders and organizations in general are very eager to maintain the pace. The pandemic has also opened up the opportunity for a radical rethink of the employee value proposition, right? With different generations looking for different things from their employer, including more flexible work and careers like Matthew, elaborated on, and lifelong learning becoming the norm. So businesses can now use technology to help meet these changing needs, from employees. Now, the changes I've described are impacting all types of organizations, but I think the implications for private and small businesses in particular are especially profound, because these firms' biggest strength often is their small and loyal workforce, reflecting the care and personal commitment they show to their employees. So this makes it absolutely critical to ensure that any changes impacting the workforce are planned and executed in the right way. The sheer scale of this.
Sorry, Deji.
Hello? Yeah?
We can't see your slides again.
No problem. Okay, let me share and reshare. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Well, let me stop sharing and reshare. Okay, 1 second. Apologies for that. Okay. Okay, I'm still on the first slide, by the way.
Okay, okay. We're good now.
Okay. All right, 1 second. Okay. All right. Thanks for calling that out. Yeah. So what I was saying in terms of the difference for small organizations or businesses in particular is that, much as the changes are impacting all types of organizations, the implications for private and small businesses are especially profound, because these firms' biggest strength is often their care and personal commitment they show to their employees. So it makes it critical that any changes impacting the workforce and how the workforce is executed in the sheer scale of the transition to the new world of work can make it daunting, especially for business-related resources. They have to be very careful. But however, in some ways, it's also boosted businesses' capacity in our current world of work, with many employees moving to remote working or being made redundant. Close and constant cooperation between HR leadership, the CEO, for that tone at the top, and the CFO, so to ensure that financial resources are allocated to support this new world of work, has become very vital. So the effect is that the HR leadership has progressed from, executing decisions to a central role in shaping and in making them as well. So what I'll attempt to cover very quickly are some of the implications and realities of our post-pandemic workspace, and some things that organizations have to consider and do to improve their agility to be able to thrive in this season of disruption. Okay. Okay, I've changed slides. Can you see them?
Yes.
Hi,
Yes,
yes, okay.
I can.
Okay, I'll keep checking with you. Sorry.
That's
okay.
fine.
All right. No problem. Okay, so if you think about the implications of disruption, right? Like I said, not centering around the pandemic specifically, but it's a good place to start from. There are many, and I've just put very few of them here. So if you think about employment terms and conditions, for example, companies now having to look at employment terms to make them more relevant to remote working or different working, right? So resumption and closing times, which is a typical feature for employment contracts. How relevant is that today? For example, provision for mandatory leave. Now that there's more of that work-life, remote working, physical working integration, how much of that is really relevant. Location of work. A lot of employment contracts will typically have where your work will be based. That is largely redundant today, as we've seen. KPIs dependent on face-to-face interaction is just another example. Types of allowances and benefits provided, etc. So we need to have more flexible or different language in contracts. Same thing goes for policies as well, which a lot of them would need to review to accommodate remote working or, different working. Let me just put it that way. There's also a financial side as well, for companies, especially if you think about manufacturing or industries and shift work, overtime eligible employees. At what point does overtime kick in, And of course, there's also the added infrastructure costs as well. Now, if you think about, for example, another big implication around data privacy and cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, right? So if you think about a typical traditional office environment where we're all in the office, there's typically a high and consistent standard of cybersecurity protection. Remember all those annoying emails and checks from IT, to update one software or the other. But at home, something that came to the fore very quick when people had to work from home, during the lockdown was employees have had to connect to the company network with different devices. I have 3 devices, I'm relying on for internet at the moment, for example. So we're connecting with all kinds of different devices, which may have less secure firewalls or protection, which has an impact on, the security of company information. Another thing as well is laptops and the security of our laptops or work devices, whatever devices we use. So agreements that you have. But if you're working from home, that's not the case, right? It could be anybody, sharing the same home space with me. And the company has no oversight of that. Conference calls, for example, is an audience of strangers today. So I could be disclosing or talking about very sensitive company information. Hey, my relative, a friend that lives with me may well be, that company's or my employer's biggest competition. There's no visibility around that, which is a big which is a big gap that companies have tried to take steps to address in the past 2 years. Of course, there's an implication on facilities. A lot of some companies, for example, Google, a year ago, sold an entire head office, because they said, look, we don't need the space because majority of our employees are working from home or working, virtually in other cities, wherever it is that they happen to live. We no longer need this office space, so let's just sell it and save on. A lot of companies, yes, it was a sunk cost for them in terms of their existing space, but it's 2 years on. So for a lot of companies, they're starting to review the size, and the layout of the office space it is that they need. Some of them, they've realized how important collaboration is, even more so. So you find that there are also some companies moving from your traditional office cubicle setting to open plan, for 2 reasons. One, the impact on collaboration, because, they feel that people collaborate more when there are no silos, walls between them. And also because hot desking, right, is also on the rise as well in terms of I have 100 employees, half of you are going to be working from home. The rest of you are not going to be coming in on the same day, right? So, I don't need as many desks commensurate to my employees. I can get fewer desks. So basically, there's that impact on size and layouts. Can you all still hear me, please?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Okay. Okay, checking. Yeah. All right. And then Matthew also shared a lot around the employee preference for working. So something that a big call out or a big implication of, the pandemic or the disruption to our world of work that we've seen, the Ukraine crisis being a very good example as well, is it forced a lot of people to really sit down and evaluate what is important to them, right? So does my life really have meaning to get up, get dressed, crack of dawn, I don't see my children, I get up, grind at work every day, and I get back into a commute of how long to come back home? Is this really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? I'm not there to see my children grow up. I'm not spending enough time either with my spouse or partner, or I'm not spending enough time doing other things that are really important to me. So I think with the pandemic, people started to really question where and how they wanted to spend their time and where and how they wanted to get work done, right? So you would find that even in traditional sectors that always felt that remote working or a different way of working was impossible, it's now the norm. So you would find that employees, especially the ones that you really want, the superstars, right, that are in high demand, working doesn't simply mean, 5 days a week, no one sees you, or weeks that no one sees you. But a lot of companies are starting to adopt hybrid arrangements where, hey, we don't need you at work full 5 days in a week. So Tuesdays you come in, Tuesdays you stay at home, for example, so that there's that balance between, your co-worker connection and collaboration and time.
Yeah, I think we just lost Deji. I hope she's able to reconnect as soon as possible. Apologies for that. I think, okay, she's back now. Okay. She's back now.
Apologies all. Hi.
Okay, yeah,
Hello,
yeah, hi, I can see you.
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Yeah, no
my network isn't great today. Let me reshare. Hi.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great. Let me reshare.
Okay.
Can you see my screen now?
No, not yet.
Can you see my screen now?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, okay. You still can't see it.
It's back up now.
Okay, fantastic. Apologies. Okay, so back to learn skills that are now relevant for our new world. Right.
Yeah, sorry, Deji. Do you want to switch audio just to save your bandwidth?
To an extent. So, if speaking to my colleagues in legal profession, for example, a lot of them are not. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, loud and clear.
Okay, apologies. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yes, the screen. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I'll try and move on swiftly. Apologies. So I was saying that the last, so the last point there in terms of implications is not just on the skill sets that are now required in this new age, but also a reorientation around the ability to work in a virtual environment. It's a skill set everybody, had to learn, which was harder for some people than others. and also for managers to be able to lead a virtual team and manage people they didn't see and interact with every day. So that was a new skill set, or a different sort of like set of muscles that, line managers had to build, which was not easy for some. So moving on quickly in terms of things to consider and do, I think the first important thing is really to map out the work and the workforce needed in the future. I mean, I say it's in the future, but it's really now, right? Everybody was sort of like holding their breath. Okay, COVID is gone. It's going to move on soon and we'll get back to normal. But the question is, what is normal today? It's very different from what normal was defined as, 2 years ago. So it's about, I think the first one is really about asking really tough questions, to say, look, is your current workforce right for the work that you need to do to be successful in the future, right? So what is our future state? Is our current workforce mapped to fit that? What are the changes that we need to make? So I think to really succeed with transformation, businesses have to reimagine their organization and their workforce, right? To ask themselves and say, look, with the mix of skills and capabilities they have today, meet their needs going forward? And if not, will you build, borrow, or buy those skill sets, right? So what's the strategy? Is it to build? Is it to borrow? Is it to buy? What are we going to do to reimagine our workforce and our organization? The second thing really is to define what virtual working looks like or will look like for us, right? So the initial switch to home working happened at speed. It was urgent, it was critical, there was no choice. But it's now time to advance from immediate responses to a sustainable method of virtual or hybrid working, right? One for the future. This is our future for the long term. And this means understanding and planning for new or often hybrid working patterns and office use, including where roles can be most effective, right? So, but whatever changes are made, top-down edicts, it won't work. It's going to be hard to get people's buy-in if you just mandate it. It's vital to engage with employees and take their views into account. And this is even more the case when needing to engage those workers who must be site-based, right, against those that can operate more flexibly. So you'd find that for people like for me, I'm in a manufacturing sector, right? So there's a lot more engagement and, efforts around motivation I need to do for people who have no choice but to be at work every day, knowing fully well that their colleagues, their counterparts, can choose to be more flexible with work. Can you all hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, apologies, still checking. Okay, so the third one is around updating. So updating your employee value proposition for the changing needs of employees. I spoke about that earlier in terms of flexible working, what is the deal you're offering your people, right? Has it changed as a result of the pandemic or as a result of, our new world of work? And what does it need to look like in order to deliver successfully in the future, right? So employees' needs and expectations change. The value proposition to attract and retain them also has to change, right? So your future vision for the business, could include the removal of costly, outdated practices and reflect the flexibility desired and the creation of a working environment and experience that helps people feel engaged, helps them feel driven, helps them feel included. And how will you achieve those priorities? Let me give you a good example, right? In my former life, I worked in an IT company, but it was an IT company, Microsoft. But for the longest time in Africa, it was the sales and marketing part of Microsoft that was based in Middle East and Africa, right? And employment contracts had that clause around proprietary information to say, whatever, information you come across, you handle belongs to the organization. So therefore, it's not yours to take with you and walk away with, right? And for many years, people were happy to join, sign it, move on. And then the company changed and decided to, bring or open the engineering, intellectual property, creation, gaming part of Microsoft into Africa. I'm sure some of us have seen it in the news. And for these guys, they looked at that clause and they said, no, this is not going to work for me. And I said, why? We've, had that clause in for many years. It's not, what's the big deal? And they said, look, we create things, right? Your sales and marketing people, they sell what we create, right? So there was obviously a stronger possessiveness around their intellectual property than there was with the sales and marketing things. I said, no, I sit down, I spend sleepless nights, I create these things, some of which I have sold to other companies. So I'm not going to sign a clause to say that whatever I create while I'm working in this company belongs to this company, right? So I had to go back to the global legal team and say, okay, where are the lines? Where do we want to draw the lines here, right? Because these guys, they're intellectual property folks, they create things in their sleep, right? It's in their DNA. Where do we draw that line? Draw that line between what belongs to the organization and what belongs to them personally as developers, as engineers. So they had to look at that clause and change that clause for the engineering team. So that's really, speaks to agility and having to very quickly adapt, to new ways of doing things. But this was after, we had several top engineers we had gone after who declined our offer. They said, no, I'm not going to sign in. I'm not going to join for that reason. So painful experience, but for me, it just showed how important it was for companies to be agile and to be adaptable to the changing needs of the organization. So moving on from that is really looking at realigning the employee reward with the real sources of value. And what I mean by that is a different workforce working in different ways requires a different approach to reward. Reward here, I'm speaking about compensation, right? Or total reward, not just salary. I'm talking about total reward as a package. So this may mean looking beyond traditional structures and finding ways to reward and recognize positive behaviors, such as upskilling, entrepreneurship, so moving away from, a situation where your side hustle is a taboo in the workplace to actually encouraging people to have a side hustle, as long as, of course, it's not in conflict, with the objectives of the company and what they're doing for the company. But do you encourage entrepreneurship? Because that's the way of the future. So that frowning on, that noise around, you're not really there till you have your own business or you're doing your own gig. The workforce is getting younger. They're more dynamic. They're more creative. They're more entrepreneurial. So you need to look for creative ways of bringing that into the organization and recognizing it inside the organization. Otherwise, they're going to either lose some very good people or people that are not going to be completely honest about what it is they're doing with their time. So that's something else to look at as well. Other examples, of things that may be outdated today. Free lunches, for example. Commuter benefits. Oh, we have a staff bus. Okay, thank you. But hey, if I'm not coming to the office every day, how attractive is that staff bus and free lunch to me, right? Not so much. Unlike, before where I was probably coming to work all the time or, I was expected to be always present in the workforce. So that has become less of a priority for employees and has been replaced by other things like healthcare, better healthcare, for example. The pandemic showed everyone how critical it is. Health is, right? If I have my health, I'm healthy, everything else is good with the world. So for a lot of people, they're not looking, okay, what's your healthcare package like? Is it enough to take care of me if there's a crisis, if I'm critically ill, if my, spouse, my kids are ill? What's your healthcare like? If it's not great, I'm not coming because I realize, okay, compensation is less of a back burner. Healthcare is now priority. Wellness programs, right? Lots of articles out there around the toll on people's mental health as a result of the pandemic. For example, people that have families in Ukraine, even us Nigerians, as far as Ukraine is, we have families there, and mental health has become more of a visible and more talked about topic, right? So what provisions do you have for mental well-being and mental care in your organization, right? So really looking at your total reward package and evaluating it to determine whether it's still relevant for your workforce or workplace of today. Another thing is also resetting performance management and incentives. Yeah, so Matthew, for example, talked about, okay, making sure that your virtual employees are not regarded as less effective or, not working, but the person I see every day is the one that is working because they're always coming to work. That has to change completely. So you'll find that for many businesses, it's been a great opportunity to press the reset button, yeah, specifically on incentives, focusing on how do we set targets now, right? The way we set targets, is it still relevant? And also determining what performance should be rewarded or not. So am I rewarding people for coming to work, for punctuality, for example, was something that was rewarded? Is that still relevant, right? Should you really be caring today whether I resume at 8 and close at 5? Right? Because, hey, I might be sitting back in the office late, but I'm on Facebook because I'm waiting for traffic to go down, right? So what are we rewarding? Is it still relevant? We should focus more on recognition, both financial and non-financial, and also reevaluating what does performance management look like in a virtual working environment. So for example, another example is, a lot of companies are now doing immediate peer-to-peer recognition for colleagues who go the extra mile, and this has gone a long way to drive engagements, to drive productivity in the organization. So recognition shouldn't just be top down. It's really, do you have opportunities for people to recognize and reward and appreciate each other, right? So that's basically it on this slide. So moving on very quickly, I'm mindful of time. Other things to also think about: diversity and inclusion. We talk about it, it's a buzzword, it sounds nice. When we're still in March, Women's Day, Women's Month, but it's really beyond a cliche. It's really, it's a priority, right? And it has to be here to stay. And HR would have to help organizations to prioritize this, because this can help with talent acquisition. It helps with employee engagement. It helps with the company's reputation as well. I see that very strongly where I work, where there's such a strong affinity to the brand, in some quarters, because of the work, that company has tried to do around diversity and inclusion, and employee retention as well is also a factor. Now we've seen how costly it is to lose an employee that you spend time, indoctrinating, training, developing. So, hey, really look at diversity as a key opportunity to increase employee retention is very important. I'm not just talking about gender, right? I think diversity, they're overall blankets, but you also need to ask yourself, what does diversity mean for my organization? For some organizations, it could be diversity in terms of ethnic origin, right? Where you walk into some companies or some departments and there's a predominant tribe in that department, right? How do you dilute that so that people from other areas feel included when they join that organization? And I'm sure I don't need to elaborate in this room how important diversity of thought is as well. Diversity of background, diversity of experiences. Or do you tend to hire people that are like you or similar to you or similar to your MD or a set of people? So we need to look at that. We need to question that. And sometimes, the responsibility sometimes falls on HR to force that mindset shift in the organization, right? So it's something to think about as well. Technology, that's what this entire conference is about, right? So the technology drive is here to stay, and if anything, it should increase, because you would find that your workforce is more virtual, right? So back in the day, when somebody came and said, oh, they're relocating to Canada, for example, that's an immediate resignation, right? Okay, bye-bye, good luck, and God bless, and you move on. But now, because of the sheer number of people that, are being lost from, especially if I talk about Nigeria workspaces to immigration to other countries, it's now, okay, companies are now starting to engage, your immigration consultants, Ernst & Young, for example, in terms of, hey, okay, what are the rules exactly? How long can I keep this employee on my payroll working for us, right? So they're starting to look at international tax laws. They're starting to look at international treaties. What countries do we have treaties with, right? In terms of working, so that we can continue to have these people work for us for as long as is legally and compliantly possible before having to do that cutoff. So of course, to manage that kind of employee that is working elsewhere, technology is front and center, right? So a lot of us, or a lot of our companies, use software for some of our processes, but there's a bigger need to automate those processes, right? And if we're going to be relevant in this post-pandemic world, there's a new, crisis going on, we would have to embrace HR processes that, used to be, face-to-face. Like even onboarding, for example, has to move to be more virtual, right? Within reason as well. So I'm sure I don't need to elaborate too much on that. Like I've said throughout the presentation, remote working is here to stay, right? So it started as a temporary transition, but it's proven to be a more permanent solution for many businesses. It's cheaper for some companies and more appealing for, should I say, most employees as well, because there's less commuting, there's more family personal time. So going forward, HR professionals would have to consider what technology and solutions will help them achieve an efficient remote workforce for the long haul. right, as a permanent solution. They'll also need to consider what HR practices will be permanently affected by the continued integration of remote work. So time and attendance, I think I talked about that earlier when you look at employment contracts, overtime policies are just some examples of things that need to be looked at differently or reviewed. Can you all still hear me?
Yes, clearly. Yes, we can.
Okay, checking in again. Thanks, Tayo. Okay, so something else as well to consider. How do you maintain your, because, you know, when you talk to a lot of, you know, HR professionals, business people, organizations, they say, look, this virtual working thing is this, you know, is this monster I want to get rid of as quickly as possible, right? Because we're losing, you know, our culture, we're losing our engagement, especially for new people that joined. I joined during the lockdown, so it took almost a year, about 10 months plus, before I met anybody I was working with, for example, right? So there's strong concerns around how do I maintain that company culture? How do I keep that engagement going if my people are working largely virtually, right? But I think it's an opportunity for us to get creative around how do we do that virtually, you know? So what are the creative ways we can maintain that culture, you know? Especially for new, you know, employees, yes, they can feel isolated and disengaged. So that concern is not unfounded completely. But to keep people engaged, I believe that we need to be connected to purpose, right? So one way to do that is to state and restate what is the company purpose, what's our vision, right? What are we about as an organization? And it's really using all avenues to sell that purpose so that no matter where people are working from or how they're working, there's a common thing it is that they're connected to, you know? So it's important that every member of the team, every single person has a very clear sense of the company's direction, right? And how their role contributes to it. So virtual meetings, I mean, we do that already anyway. Hangouts. So I've attended, you know, parties. I've attended workout events, drinking sessions, cocktail sessions. I've done all those things and more on Zoom, right? All virtual, you know, and a lot of fun was created around that. So yes, it's not ideal. It's not the same thing as people meeting, but you see, as your workforce gets more dispersed and that reliance on technology increases, it would have to be sort of like the norm, yeah, and part of your way of working. Employee surveys would also have to be done more regularly if it's not being done already. So that constant is the company's way of constantly checking in to see where people are at and how they're feeling and how connected that they still are, you know, to the organization. So I think for companies that didn't really have this as a priority, that has to become front and center. How often are you doing surveys? How often are you encouraging people to be open about what they share in those surveys? How anonymous are those surveys as well, right? So if there's retaliation, no matter how indirect, you know, for what people have shared, then, hey, they're going to climb up the next time, right? So that also has to be managed very, very carefully as well. Like I shared previously, well-being and the focus on well-being is here to stay, right? And it's going to even increase. People have been questioning the role of well-being in their work life, right? So we need to really step up to support employees' well-being and engagement in ways we haven't done before. You know, so like I said, mental health support programs, for example, expanding our medical offering to include, you know, gym memberships or, you know, fitness supports. That's something that, you know, organizations are looking at as well. So more of not just a reactive sort of like health package for when you're actually sick, but a lot of proactive stuff as well, you know. So gyms, health club memberships, you know, support and counseling programs as well has also been on the increase as well, because these are tough times and we don't know what the next wave is going to bring, right? So let's not look at the end of the pandemic as the end to all our troubles, because hey, who knows what's what's coming around the corner. And this is really around building long-term agility, if you think about it. So those structures do have to be put in place as well. Now, cross-functional working, that's what that means. So in other words, redefining what a team means, right? Changing the constitution of a team to be built around both immediate, short and long-term business needs. And the essence of doing that, it enables organizations to change direction quickly of the business from one product or path to another. and to move people between functions as productivity requires, right? So if I use a more practical example for some of us, during the lockdown, of course, there were pockets of redundancy where there were some teams where, because of the nature of their job, because they were not working in the office, they had less to do, right, in a sense. But for some functions, if you think about HR, for example, a large chunk of finance, work didn't really change, right? Because it was largely, laptop-based, interaction-based, pick up the phone, talking to people. So for some organizations, they set up cross-functional work streams. They identify to say, okay, what are our short-term needs, right? What are things we've tried to fix, but we just never were set up or had the time to do so? So whether it's, okay, eliminating waste in our production, for example, right? Or places or areas, problem areas where we've had to sell our products that, we always had some resistance or difficulty. I don't want to, call any parts of my country specifically. How do we unlock that? So the lockdown was a good opportunity to set up cross-functional teams. So yes, I'm in HR, I'm in finance, I'm in procurement, I'm in compliance. It doesn't matter. This is a new team, right? So teams were set up with people across functions and being led by people that were not necessarily the most senior in the group, right? So you would find that, okay, if it was a team around waste management, who is the expert in the organization? That person would lead that work stream, irrespective of what their level was in the organization. So what has happened, even post the lockdown, is that that cross-functional working has continued in some organizations where it's, okay, we have a need, we have something we need to unlock. Hey, let's set up a team across functions. Let's get this done, right? So some are looking at immediate problem areas. Some are looking at long-term. So for some organizations, it's, hey, we've always tried to get into exports. What are the barriers to us going into exporting our products? Set up the team around that and let them look at that side by side with their everyday work. So you'd find that cross-functional working or redefining what a team is and what it means is something that we need to also look at very differently. And last but not the least on this slide, I'm sure I don't need to talk about this too much, is around compliance, right? And it's not the traditional sense of compliance. So you find that as laws and guidelines continue to change, organizations, working through HR legal compliance functions have to remain on top of compliance requirements, right? So something that kept on coming up during the lockdown, if I speak from my own personal experience, was people working remotely in other countries. At what point does it create a tax exposure, for example, right? At what point is this no longer legal, right? And how do we closely monitor that to make sure that we're not running foul of whatever laws there are that guide that area? HR also has to help with rewriting employee handbooks or manuals or policies, right? That would need to, that need significant overhauling. So the ones around data privacy, I spoke about that earlier. Confidentiality of employer data, that has to widen, right? To include scenarios that come up during remote working. Rules to minimize vulnerability, cybersecurity, like I spoke about before, conditions and terms of employment with respect to resumption, closing times, and whatnot. And also having more stringent rules defining the difference between an employee and a contractor. That has also changed, right? Who is an employee? Who is a contractor, a consultant? What does that mean? So we need to look at that in our respective organization and define and create clear guidelines around what the definitions are, right, from a compliance standpoint. So the future, like to sum it all up very nicely, technology. That's what this whole conference is about, right?
Hi, Deji.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Deji. We have just about a minute left, so.
Okay. Yeah, this is my last slide.
Wow.
So that's
okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's my last slide. So a heavy investment in technology, is here to stay. We've talked about that, throughout the conference. Comfort with ambiguity and uncertainty is a muscle, an agility muscle that companies have to build. And what I mean by that is, yes, like I said, the pandemic is here, it's moved on. It hasn't moved on. There have been several waves, for example, which reevaluated all the plans that some of us had put in place. Tomorrow it's Ukraine. We always felt that, okay, it's in a faraway place. It doesn't really affect us. but it has in one way or the other. It's depending on what organization or country that we're in. So that comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity and not knowing what's around the corner is a skill set that we have to build as well. Innovation and agility is our new currency, right? The ability to change direction easily from one product path to another is something that we have to keep doing. It involves, a constant paradigm shift. So it's really only companies that are agile and carry their people along, in that process of swift change that will survive in the future. And HR has a very critical role to play in that transition. So thank you very much, Tayo. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Deji. That was a very power-packed session, as stated by someone in the chat. Yeah, we would not be able to take many questions because of the time, but I'll just try and take just one. So the question says, the economic condition across Africa is currently in a downward sloping curve. How can HR motivate for improved rewards when the core business isn't making profits?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean that's a reality, not just in Africa. We tend to, being Africans in Africa, we tend to think it's unique to us, but it's not. If you look at a lot of the news around Europe, you would see that that's a situation as well. But remember in the presentation, I talked about looking at non-monetary ways to reward employees, right? So you'd find that if you have the workforce of today, they are, a lot of employees are keen to develop different skills, for example, right? So one thing you could look at is, how do you help employees, move from one function or one part of the business to the other for a, short period or a long period, depending on what the situation is. So something we've done or I've looked at is, for people that say, let me just give you a very basic example, a finance person that says they want to develop some skills in HR or skills in procurement, right? What are the opportunities that are created, whether it's someone going on, a short-term leave or just creating space for that person to work in that function for a period of time, right? So that way you're also helping them develop new skills that they didn't have before. I talked about employee recognition, right? So how often do we use our engagement or our town halls, whatever means of communication we use in our organizations to recognize people for work well done? Yeah. So recognition also comes into play. How often do we have engagements at events that are not work-based, right? So for a lot of organizations, every time there's a session to be held, right? Let me just put it that way. It's going to be about work, about the numbers, about how badly we're doing or how well we're doing, right? But how often do we create fun events for people to just connect and engage, even if it's virtual, right? And not just talk about work all the time. So there's motivation, there's engagement. Let's not make the mistake of thinking that engagement or motivation is 100% monetary. Yes, in our reality, it's a big, big role. The cost of living here is pretty high in Nigeria, we know that. But also, like you said, the reality is that not all companies can just rise to the occasion and increase salaries commensurate with inflation, right? So you have to really get creative, I think, as HR, supported by the business, around other ways it is that you can motivate people as well. It's not easy, but it's something that we'll have to do.
Thank you very much, Ayodeji. Really very, very interesting session. Thank you very much, and we hope that when next we call upon you, you would answer us. Thank you once again.
My pleasure, and sorry for the internet glitches. Thank you.
It's totally fine. Thank you very much.